Just kidding.
Good morning, everyone. As Amanda makes a joke right as I start the introduction, but that's fine. Welcome to our first session of day 2 of CME Palooza Spring. This is our first time doing the 2-day thing. So we are happy for everyone who has joined. Let me pull up the slides real quick. So this is our Seeing It Both Ways session. Session sponsored by Peer Audience. Big thank you to them. Moderated by Riaz Baksamusa, for Associate Director of IME Grants at Stellus. I will turn things over to Riaz in one moment, but first, everyone's favorite thing, the reading of the sponsors. So big thank you to our gold sponsors, Genentech and ACHL. Our silver sponsors, ASIM, Forefront Collaborative, Educational Measures, Medscape Education, and Peer Audience. And our bronze sponsors, Catamount Medical Education, Clinical Care Options, CMEology, Creative Educational Concepts, Global Education Group, Helio Education Lab, Impact Education, Infograph Ed, PrimeEd, Primary Care Network, Real CME, RedMed Ed, ArmyI, Viator Medical Communications, and Vindico Medical Education. As always, there are 3 ways. Ooh, let me move the cursor off. 3 ways that you can ask questions. 1, you can use the Educational Measures text line to send in a question. 267-6660-CME or 0263. You can also click on the Google Slides link, which is on the live page, which you hopefully are looking at right now. There's a little link right above the screen. Click the link that is beside my name, not Scott's, because I am Derek, not Scott. And you can tweet your question using the CME Palooza hashtag. I'll be monitoring all of those various channels, so feel free to use any of them. Although really the texting is the easiest one, but you can use any of them. Speaker disclosure slide. The opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed by our panelists are their own, and they do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, parent company, or affiliates. And I think that is my last slide. So Riaz, I am going to turn it over to you. Take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Derek. Welcome everybody to the inaugural, I guess, of day 2 presentation of Seeing It Both Ways. This session just really is, we've got a great panel, and I'm going to turn it over to each of the panelists to introduce themselves. My name is Riaz Baksamusa. I'm an Associate Director of Medical Education Independent Medical Education with Stellus. And I'll let each of the panelists kind of go through, and we'll start with you, Audrey, and then just move down the line.
Well, good morning. I am Audrey Torno, Senior Director of Educational Strategy here at Paradigm Medical Communications.
Amanda?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Solis, the Global Director Grant Officer for Inflammation Immunology at Pfizer.
And Mary?
Mary Faulkner. I'm a Senior Manager over at AbbVie.
And our last but not least, Pete.
Well, maybe I remember the name. Hi, I'm Pete Sheldon, everybody. I'm the Vice President of Education and Patient Engagement here at MedIQ in Baltimore, Maryland.
So as you can see from here, we've put together a panel, and these are the cream of the crop of the industry, in my eyes at least. And the session is really focusing, we put 2 panelists from industry and different parts of the industry, really, a small, medium, and a larger pharma, and with different processes of reviewing grants and things. And we also put in 2 of our colleagues from the medical education MEC side of the industry, and really to try to engage in a conversation, and this is really going to be a conversational panel discussion to really talk through, when you see a grant, we all see grants as the supporter side. We see the grants and we review these things, and we might see 2 webcasts that look similar if we just don't know a lot about them. They're both webcasts. They're 1 hour long. They're reaching this target audience, And there's some uniqueness to them, and we'll go through and we'll just talk through some of the factors that go into the planning process from a MEC side. You'll understand really from a supporter side, what do we look at and how do we read these requests, and what are some of the big items that you can take away and kind of say, oh, that's important to really see. I didn't really think about that. Hopefully you'll do that. And at the end, we'll give some key takeaways, pearls, that we will put together, and you can download that slide, screen capture it, however you need to do it. And if you don't have time right now, you can always go and replay the replay of the whole webcast just to see that one slide of the key takeaways, and then you can post that on your wall. So really, to start, the first topic I wanted to kind of throw out there is really around the collaboration with societies and other partners, and kind of the impact of these collaborations on the rescopes, and how does it look from a multi-support. I know that's a lot of things right there. So let's start from Audrey, from a MEC perspective. Just if you can just talk through kind of what are some of the unique challenges that a collaboration really, when you have a collaborative partner or society, that you kind of take into account.
Sure. I think from a grant development standpoint, we all see that there's value to bringing in partners that have strengths or that complement strengths that other organizations may have. You definitely want to be working with individuals who understand the CME landscape and what they can bring to it. But when designing a grant and bringing in those partners, you definitely need to define not only your roles and responsibilities, but expectations about what you're going to be able to deliver. Grant funding, when you are seeking it, if that is going to be the sole source of revenue for your project and be able to deliver on that, you need to be able to understand that, and I know we're going to jump this later, but what would be the best thing you think you could put together, and have everybody bring those ideas to the table. Then you have to sit down and figure out what are those ideas going to cost. And when we build the budget, then having an understanding that if we did not achieve full funding, how could we still meet the educational needs of the target audience and deliver as close as possible to that deliverable, with everybody scaling back a little bit. And that may mean scaling back on what we do, or it may be scaling back on reach, or it may be scaling back on, for lack of a better word, bells and whistles. It would be great to use virtual reality, but if you didn't have the funding, can you achieve the same thing with just basic ARS? Or if you are looking at different collaborative groups coming in, can everybody define for themselves a role where this would be the best big picture that we could put together? If we needed to take a step back, here's how we would redefine the project, because we know we're going to have to go back to the supporters. In terms of a rescope or multi-support, and I think Pete can agree with me here, that's when a little bit of the headache starts, because funding cycles are different, review committee timing is different, association deadlines are going to come into play. You're also going to have expectations of what a review committee was hoping to get. And now when you go back with something that was going to be video and now is going to be text-based, do they feel that it'll still be able to achieve the same goals, reach those same outcomes, and really trying to make as clear as possible any of the changes that you're making, what's staying, what's being lost. Those things really become key to giving any of the supporters reviewing it a really good opportunity to understand where the new project might lie.
Great. And Pete, actually, I'm going to kind of turn to you as well, because Audrey mentioned a couple things there. Really, we were talking about the rescope and well, lack of a better term, I think, a contingency plan of how do you scale back the program. In your experience, what has been kind of that process that you go through from the MEC side when you have to scale back and things? How much of that planning do you go through up front? And then what kinds of information are the key things that you include in your rescope request, I guess?
Yeah, sure. And I think, to dovetail off what Audrey said, when you have to rescope a program, right, there's a learning process that most mechs go through. And 5-6 years ago, what we would say to each other is, well, we can't figure out what the rescope is as we're trying to plan this activity because we don't know ultimately how much money we're going to have. Let's wait and find out how much funding we have, and then we'll figure it out from there, which has a sort of logical continuity to it, but you learn very quickly, right, that devolves into a race to the bottom sometimes on trying to put something together where, again, working with collaborators, that there's some budgetary needs and things that, ultimately may change the essence of the program that you were starting out with. So we learned early on, especially with multi-support, is what is the plan for rescope if we get something less. And even though we don't necessarily know how much funding we're going to get, there is always a plan B that we can work from, because if you don't establish that with the collaborator up front, right, again, then it's just a negotiation that you're having, and typically the program can suffer, on the back end. So, I just want to make the point that, always have a plan B, even if it's not multi-support, if it's sole support, on what are you going to do if you get less funding. And you don't know what that is, but you got to have a plan in place.
So, Mary, I'm going to turn to you from a industry supporters perspective. How do you guys process, and not necessarily AbbVie's only way, but just in your experience in the industry, how has rescopes, what have been the successful tricks and tips that the committee has seen from rescopes, and is there something that makes that process go just that much better, smoother?
I'm not sure if there's a standard answer to that, and you alluded to that says there's not always the same way. I think the thing that's most important is helping us understand in that rescope, to be really blunt, is it even worth it? Because there's a point that you get to that says by the time you rescope it, you're at a point that it looks like, 4 other requests that happen to be in our system. So is it really worth it? So I think that there's not a standard answer to that, because based on what that rescope looks like, the best thing to do is, as soon as you have the information and as soon as it's going to be rescoped, to let us know so that we can review that rescope, see if we still want to support that, as well as any system change or programmatic changes internally we need to make sure that we're adjusting for and accounting for, that we know those as early in the process as we can.
That's great. And Amanda, is there, so I think the one question I have for you that is dovetailing off of what Mary said as well, is that really when someone comes in with a rescope, it suddenly, that program may look like something else that you are either already supporting, or that is similar thing that was in your system that you might have had 3 grants and you selected one of the 3. So if you can just give us a little bit of a background, that what kinds of conversations happen when you look at rescopes? Do you negotiate? Do you kind of go back to how much do you go back and forth, versus is it a fixed process of I can do this, or now this is a no?
Yeah, at Pfizer, it's a little different, I guess, because we initially do the competitive grant review for the grant types. Everything is reviewed against all the other proposals at once. If you're selected and you move forward to an approval, and then post-approval you have a rescope, we issue a scope change report in our grants portal, and it's a very formal process where you go in, tell us exactly what changed, does it impact the timeline, is the budget impacted? We then review all of that and determine, is this still aligned with what the initial program, why we essentially, as a review committee, made the initial decision to approve. Generally, most of the time, there are small changes in scope that we note. Maybe the timeline was adjusted, it took longer to confirm the speakers, so on and so forth. So I would say the majority of the time, there are small changes that we simply want to capture them in our portal and have a record of it. And generally the approval is given and you can proceed. When there are issues due to multi-support and not getting all of the funding that you anticipated, we certainly work through that as well, but we don't actually go all the way back to the entire review committee. It's a decision made by the grant manager, depending on the grant type, or the grant officer.
Okay, perfect. And, we have a comment from the audience that I'm going to try to read this one. It's the learning process for rescoping isn't just a challenge for MECs. Academics have internal pressures that can make rescoping challenging, especially if part of the support is already awarded. Question is, to Mary's point, what makes it worth it for a rescope? Mary, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I would say that, is it substantively the program achieving what it intended? Now, there might be a reduction in, sites, there might be a reduction in technology, there's lots of things that can create that scope change. So at the end of the day, is the essence of what you were trying to achieve still going to happen based on that rescope? So to me, that's what I mean by worth it, is that assessment, not only against that individual grant, but to Amanda's comment that, because they have the opportunity, the way that you run the grant review, you're looking at them all at the same time, and we don't have that process, but you still have several grants in front of you that you're reviewing it against. So when you take that and you now review it against 4 other grants, are you achieving it as well as you can or not? And so that's how I kind of defined worth it.
Mm-hmm. And Riaz, can I jump in here just real quick? Just one of the things that we talk about is sort of as our bellwether as we're looking at rescoping something. And again, to the question of whether it's worth it, there's an alarm that goes off when we start changing outcomes, expectations, right? And again, to Amanda's earlier point, right? Audience, number of participation, and maybe the platform. Those are things that, again, you may be able to negotiate through and keep the essence of the program. But when you start looking at outcomes, and that does happen, and we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later in the discussion. When that starts happening, then you're changing the program, and that may be something that you want to shy away from, or then that it's not worth it.
All right, perfect. Okay, so another topic that we wanted to just cover, and we'll. I'm going to pause actually in between each topic. I'm just going to pause for about 20 seconds at least. If we have any comments or questions, additional questions about the topic that we just discussed, feel free to kind of let us know. You'll have a 20-second window here. And then if not, we'll move on, and that's okay. And we can still come back and revisit things if we need to.
Riaz, I would say just keep on moving. I'll give you the questions when they come.
All right, perfect. Thanks. So then we'll talk really about the elements of grant design next, and really from I'm going to start with the supporter's perspective. So Amanda, we'll go to you. I think I went to Mary first last time. So Amanda, from a supporter perspective, kind of what are the variables? And this just talks a little bit about what we just came from. What are those variables that matter? And do we want to see any historical proof? How important is it to see the historical validity of that you've done this before? I think the challenge is that from an industry perspective, we a lot of times say we a lot of times say that we want innovation, and innovation is something new, novel that typically hasn't been done before, and so that's the challenge we have. So how much, where do you balance that with innovation and historical proof?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think a few things I want to speak about before I get to answering that question specifically about innovation is, I want everyone to remember when doing the proposals that the audience is not actually made up of reading the proposals other CME professionals. So oftentimes when I'm in a grant review committee, depending on the grant type, it will either be a panel of external experts that are clinicians, maybe quality improvement professionals, educationalists. There's always one from the RFP standpoint. Clinicians have very strong feelings about medical education programs based on their N of one, usually, I did that one and I didn't like it. So that can be quite challenging sometimes. So it's nice to see in proposals speak to why you selected a certain partner. We have experience with this particular partner, and that's why we chose them. We have worked with them for maybe 5 years, or we've done 3 or 4 solid programs together, and that's why we selected them, or why you selected a particular platform. I think that's helpful as well, because oftentimes, you know, we will speak to that, to what we know about certain platforms. And then from an innovation standpoint, I think it is definitely fun to be able to support some things that are more innovative. And I've actually heard feedback. We were in an internal meeting recently, and someone, a clinician in the room, said, "Oh, I'm hearing from the gastroenterology community that they really like those micro modules, and it was funny because 2 days prior we had reviewed something, I think, that had that type of approach in it, but the internal review committee wasn't sure how they felt about micro modules, and we had a discussion about that. So it's definitely interesting, and if you can include why maybe you chose that particular format or platform or what have you, if you can even a survey or point to an article, which many times you do, but I do think it helps that resonate, because again, at least within Pfizer, our review committees are not always people that have experience in the adult learning landscape.
Okay. And then from your perspective, I believe that Pfizer, that review committee is a live meeting, correct?
Yes.
So you're, Mary, I'm not sure how AbbVie does it right now, but in the past, I think I recall that it was a little bit of electronic routing as well, and not getting away from some of the live grant review meetings. So what are the challenges that kind of brings into it, as well as then if we can go back to the variables that matter in the historical proof, what are those important things to you?
I think so. We have a combination of live and electronic routing. So we have the ability to have the conversation with anybody that is part of that review committee, regardless of how that happens, whether you're sitting across from each other or it's conference call or email, whatever that happens to be. But so for me, historical proof is, when you talk about innovation, those two kind of don't go together, right? Because innovation is typically something that's going to be new. So I think that what we, and that's something we're really proud of, is our ability to support unique things that not a lot of other people have supported. And part of that is because our team tends to be a little bit more autonomous based on where we sit in the organization and how we review grants. So from a historical proof, when we've supported those things or that are outside the normal box of what we support, are things that talk more about, comparing it to other things that are happening in education, maybe outside of the pharma space. What's happening in other areas? What are the learning models that demonstrate this type of learning works? And that first shot, or that first time we support it, or the first time that type of education's been out there, it's always a conversation at the end of it that said, did it work? And a reflection back on, all right, what worked and what didn't work? Like, what was why was the participation so low? Is there a reason for it? So I think part of it is giving us the knowledge to understand why we think it's a good idea, why we think it's going to be different in the market. And then really importantly is on the back end, coming back and looking at it and say, why did it work or why didn't it work? And going from there.
Perfect. Okay. And from a MEC perspective, I'll turn to you, Pete, first. Just alternate. Really, do you always shoot for the moon and kind of come up with the biggest idea, or do you scale it and really target it to say that we want to reach this specific audience and really do a deeper dive, and some things that you can do with a smaller group? There's, when you talk about use of technology, technology has a per head cost and some fixed costs as well. And so it may be very cost prohibitive to do too big of a scale, but how do you balance that when you guys are coming up with your planning process?
Yeah, sure. And I think, From our standpoint, we have a process that we go through internally, and it's called our grant planning meeting that we have once a week. And what it is, it's not just grant development and content, et cetera. It's the entire company. So it's IT, it's compliance, it's project management. There's like there's almost 30 people sometimes that are in that meeting. And what it is we pitch the idea, and it's almost like a sales process internally. And the idea is push back, right? What are we not thinking of? What would make this program stronger? And importantly, we always ask ourselves the question, is this something that we are uniquely positioned to do, right? Or is this something that any medical education company or academic, provider could also do just as good a job as us? Do we have anything here that we can actually bring to the table, which is new? It may not be big, it may not be shoot for the moon type of expensive, but maybe it's just some kind of content or outcomes that we've had from a previous program that we think would apply to a new grant request. So I think, and there are many times that we come out of that meeting and the answer is no, we're not doing this. You got to think it through better, and we have to look at a way to hone down the costs or to change the outcomes. And again, that's sometimes painful because we think that there might be an opportunity for funding and we want to go ahead and move forward, but our team really puts us in check on that, and it's a very good process.
Now, Pete, you've been at a couple of different companies really throughout your career. Mm-hmm. Is that structure, because that's something I'm personally hearing for one of the first times, is really that structure of that team that you vet your proposals against. And I think you mentioned compliance was in there, and you've got your medical directors and things like that, the strategy team. Is that something that a lot of companies have?
I can't speak, across the board. I think, the size of the organization and bandwidth, I think has a lot to do with it. My sense is that we should probably do as an industry more of that. I think sometimes, as people that are looking for grant funding, especially commercial support grant funding, is you get an RFP. So there's an opportunity window, and there's a certain dollar amount, and there's a certain, learning objectives that are attached to that. And so you start thinking very narrowly, like, are we going to do this or not? And can we get, respond in time? I think for us, it's always important that we take a step back and say, listen, there will be other opportunities, right? If we think that this is legitimate, we should go after it if we think that we have something special to offer. But, I wouldn't know. I would ask Audrey, if that's the same process. You like how I transitioned that away?
That was beautiful. It was
moderating here.
It's like we have a beach ball.
Right.
No, I mean, I would echo Pete's sentiments. We've done two different things here. One is the conception of any grant isn't developed without representation from all of our different departments. So I would say exactly that: CME, program management, editorial, scientific direction, getting everybody together, because you are absolutely trying to define a project that's going to achieve certain goals, and you need all of those perspectives in the room to see what you're missing. And so that's where the strength of identifying partners are going to come in, because there may be a strength that someone else can leverage. So in terms of reaching something innovative, and I know we all say that term is being overused at times, but to figure out what's next, what's new, what's different, sometimes we may come up with an idea, but we may not have the resource internally. Then you're looking to bring in a partner who can bring that, so that when you are any provider preparing a grant, you can identify the reason for these partners being selected. It's like building a house and bringing in the strongest contractors. Anybody who's going to do a renovation project in their home, you'd really like to see examples of past work. You don't necessarily want to always go like, well, there was somebody who said they are really interested in kitchen renovation. Could they have $20,000 and a couple months, and we'll see where you are? You want a plan. you want some type of fallback. You want to see examples of their past work. So I think in terms of being innovative, perhaps it's not something that I, as an individual company, can show you an exact replica of. But maybe what I can show you is, we have experience in this area. Here's an example of it. And this new partner has experience in this other area. When we bring those together, we're confident in our ability to achieve this for you. And I think that goes towards speaking to in an RFP setting or any type of review process where you have multiple grants that you could fund. You are looking to identify why this one instead of the others. And you know, we're not on that decision side. We are in the giving you the reasons why you can make a decision. But we also know that once you make that decision, you're walking away and you're hoping that the kitchen of your dreams that you envisioned is actually going to happen, also within the time frame that was promised to you, at the budget that was promised to you, not a phone call later on down the line. Right. That's where those contingency plans really do come in, so that we can set appropriate expectations. You know, we here had a meeting, just the entire company, very similar to Pete's experience, and it was like, bring any idea to the table. Like, no idea is a bad idea. So, you know, we can't come up with something new if we're not shooting for the moon. It doesn't mean we're going to be able to do them all, but now we kind of have a big arsenal of things to draw on. And in terms of marrying those ideas, I mean, there's like, you know, edutainment, but, you know, you want to be fun, you want to be creative, you want to understand the shifting towards more mobile. People have less time. You know, I love watching recipes be done now on my Facebook feed where it's like 30 seconds. I'm like, I don't sit down for a whole hour cooking show anymore because I don't have the whole hour. So, you know, how do you translate that into your proposals? Well, I'm going to try to get a 40-page proposal down to 15 pages, and I want you to understand the idea. So what highlights can I provide you that are thorough enough for you to know what we're aiming for? And also, you know, embed that contingency plan if at all possible. I mean, every grantor's system is different. And Pete and I know that. Anybody submitting a grant knows that. So my proposal is going to be a packaged product. And then I'm going to dissect it in 1,000 different ways to meet all of the different budgetary needs for submission, all of the different questions that are going to be answered about the process. And there are quite a number who say, what is the plan if full funding isn't achieved? And it's great when we can tell you that up front, because then, like Amanda was saying earlier, then you can incorporate that into your conversation at the point of review. And I know that there are other processes that don't permit for that. But whenever possible, we try to do that. Or then in response to a request for additional information we may receive from supporters, provide additional insight then if it didn't come through clearly enough. So those opportunities are always great.
Okay, so I'm gonna first go to a question that we got on the from the.
Hey, Rios, can I make one comment?
Sure. Go ahead.
I just wanted, so something it seems from my perspective, we've gotten away from, or at least in a lot of the grant submissions, and this is really, really basic, and it seems a little silly to say this, but in a first paragraph of a letter of request, why is this grant different than any other grant we're going to see? Right. And it seems so basic, but really, I mean, don't start with the needs assessment, you know, talking about patients with unmet needs. We know that, and we're going to see that in the needs assessment, but why are you different than any other grant that's in our system? That will make it a lot easier, because I mean, in some cases, it's the same like any other grant in our system, and we need those. Those are the foundation of a lot of education. But the differentiation between your request versus any other one, that answer right up front will make it a lot easier, I think, for us, or it will help provide perspective for us as we step into a long grant review.
Yeah, and I think the only addition that I would add there is that keep it brief too. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, a 2, 3, 4 page little response to just that, but really as brief as possible. And I'm going to get back to that in a second. I just want the question that really quick one is from a process standpoint, I think, in regards to multi-support initiatives, if a provider receives partial support from one potential funder, and your grant committee is still under review with the proposal, is it helpful, and how can they communicate that they have received that partial support, or is that irrelevant to the decision?
I will answer that, and I will say thank you for those who have sent those emails to me, even quite recently. They are helpful. Even if you don't hear back from me, they are helpful to share with the committee, or just to note for myself, because there is sometimes this balance, right, with the multi-support programs, or with programs that are quite large in scale, that we want to support, but there's that, nagging question mark. What happens if, and so it is nice to have those real-time updates of other support.
Mary?
I would say that the time that it's most important is when it's going to impact the funding you need from us. So we don't use that as much as a tool to say somebody else supported it, therefore it's valid education. We'll make that decision independently. But if the dollars you need from us, it has been reduced, that's really important, because a lot of times, as we know, it comes down to the available budget. So if I need to give you less money to support that at the full project, that's important. That piece of information is important.
Well, so I'm gonna ask a question then for that. Really, for you, Mary, is that how important is it then when you're comparing proposals? And I don't know your system if it allows you to say I think we all have a question of what other potential supporters are there. And initially, when they're entering the grant request in the online, they're asking 10 different supporters for whatever $100,000 for their $1 million program. But how important is it then to know that this one definitely is multi-support versus the other ones are potential multi-support still, but they're going to have to, if Pfizer and AbbVie are both playing in the same therapeutic area, when you look at a grant request and it's, let's just say, a satellite symposium at a local or at a national conference, how important is it to know that, well, hey, listen, if we're gonna be doing a satellite symposium and we want it to be multi-support, just from a budgetary standpoint, it's nice to know that Pfizer has already made their decision, and this one is definitely multi-support versus this one, they're going to have to potentially go out for additional supporters. Does that piece play any kind of a role?
I think that's the art of grant review.
Yeah.
Right. It's that measure of, boy, grant A versus B or C. Well, B's not really perfect for what we want, but it's got multi-support, and A doesn't have multi-support, but it's exactly, the type of program we want to support. So that's the craft of the grant managers as they're reviewing them, making those assessments. I don't think there's any one clear answer on that, other than all of the elements that we take into consideration.
And if I can just make, this is an unrelated statement, but I've read quite a few proposals lately, and there's a sticking point with Pfizer when and if we support a satellite symposium, because we do not fund food and beverage. The question that I need answered, if you submit a grant request and a satellite is included, and and I know that we cannot fund food, what is your plan for food? If there will be food, tell me how you're going to pay for that. Because everyone I read, my comment in the comment box is, if there's not food and I go, I just need to understand, kind of one sentence will help me understand what your plan is for that.
Sure.
Forgive me, I was using the platform to make that statement.
That's fine. I'm gonna jump around a little bit here. Because I think, Mary, you started talking about it with that letter of request and the upfront. Why is this different? So I'm gonna ask the question of, from a supporter standpoint, is there one? If you had to name one item that makes your life a lot easier or better, right? So aside from working with me, that's best, right? But other than that, what is that one item that supporters can do or MECs can do to make their proposal just go through a process a lot easier? Is there anything?
All right, you've worked with me for a long time, and I'm not going to answer that question. I think, you ask what the one thing is that is the best asset, and that's, we've got a team of people that review grants, and every single one of them probably uses something that they feel is most impactful. So if I look at a grant review, I start with, the letter of request in the agenda. Somebody else on the team might start with a needs assessment and reviewing outcomes. Everybody's got a different way to approach that. grant review so that they feel that they get the best picture of what that is. So I see we did have a question that came through that talks about how important is the letter of request compared to the information entered into the online system. Well, the information in the online system is words. That's all. It's just, you're answering questions and you're limited in what you can tell. So to me, the letter of request is it's that free-form story of what those data points mean in the system. So I think the letter of request, short to the point, is your opportunity to say, this is why I'm better than the next one. And I feel the letter of request is important.
So another idea really is then a summary, like a PowerPoint schematic diagram summary of the overall project timeline and outcomes. Is that helpful to you?
I mean, yeah, we have had some executive summaries. In some cases, we've asked for those. Yes, that's always a helpful document to have. But I would say it's not the, end all be all.
Okay, and okay, so from a Pfizer standpoint, is that you guys go through a process a little differently? Is that still part of your request process, or?
Part of yes. So
the overall summary, that 1 page or 2 pages summary, schematic summary.
I think including an executive summary, I don't think we have an overview section, and a lot of people and organizations are doing that really well right now. I think providing the kind of opening section where you indicate this is the format, this is why, here's a paragraph on the high level needs and the gaps in the target audience, so on and so forth. So I do see people doing that quite well, not in every single proposal. What I would answer is the most helpful thing. Personally, what I comb through each proposal for right away is to find the format. The needs assessments are great, but from the standpoint, we have different people on our panels for various reasons, but the clinicians will look at the needs assessment more closely than I will, and I'm reviewing from really that educational standpoint, or if it's an RFP from a change standpoint, what the program is and why it's strong and why it's robust and what's the feasibility. And so that upfront section is actually quite important so I can gather that quickly. And I think another thing I want to note is that I agree with Mary that there's an art to the grant review, but I think that at Pfizer, we are leaning toward taking a more systematic approach and going, back to utilization of a scorecard to have very specific things that we're looking for so that we can do an apples to apples comparison as much as possible in the grants. In a competitive grant review process, you may be looking at 12 at a time. Personally, I just had 39 that I was reviewing all on the same topic, and it is quite difficult to read 39 proposals and discern, what is the difference between these. So that executive summary or very quick section at the top is very helpful.
Okay, so just 2 really quick follow-up questions on that scorecard. Do you share the scorecard of anything that you yes or no to, and then B, do you even share a blank template of the scorecard so that providers can kind of keep things in mind?
Yeah, I should have said scorecard. I know I'm going to get in trouble for that now, but I think it's something that we're using as a training mechanism right now. Our team has grown, and so I should sling that question over to Derek, actually.
Hey, this is your. I'm just the moderator. I'm just running the thing. You're on your own.
Hey, back, Derek. But yeah. No, so that's right now from a training perspective. We could probably talk about that down the road and sharing it. It's more of an internal thing. But to the answer to your question, we have a formal scorecard. We actually do share quite robust feedback on the RFP side. In fact, I have a lot of this to work on this week in terms of giving people exact scores in the RFP stage, and also feedback and actual comments verbatims from the external review panel.
Great. Okay. So a couple of, I'm going back to some of the questions that we've gotten online here, and this helps me really. blends into what we were wanting to talk about a little bit. So I'm going to actually ask from a MEC standpoint, Audrey and Pete, to chime in. Really, what are your best practices that you guys have put together for, we see a lot of the grant requests coming in, and they say, we're reaching learners beyond the, rheumatologists or providers who see this kind of rheumatology patients or whatever it is, and without just that big blanket that basically covers anybody who happens to be clicking on the link and that they have an interest. Is there any best practices that you guys have incorporated to over the years to change the format of your proposals so that you're more specific in writing out why you chose that audience, how specific of an audience, and then do you incorporate that into your outcomes measurements to say we reach 80% of the target audience that we had initiated, and 20% there are others that might have found the interesting topic, but not necessarily part of our target outreach. So Amanda, Audrey, yeah, Amanda. Audrey, I'm going to start with you.
Don't ask me.
Let me start from defining that target audience. I think that when you're looking at the education you're going to do, clearly you want to make sure that you are getting to the appropriate learners. Live formats allow for that to be a little bit more targeted. Most of the time, if you are doing a satellite symposia, you are not at the association conference for that target audience. That's the reason why you selected that to be the vehicle for your education. You are going there to reach the appropriate audience because you want those clinicians to get the information. They are treating the patients that need the education to be flowing freely. So when you jump to an online platform, there are going to be a lot of other interested individuals for a variety of reasons that are going to be seeking the education that you're putting out there. So from a proposal standpoint, I think making sure that you're clearly defining, again, why a certain tactic is being pursued, and then how many individuals or who in that target audience you plan on reaching via those vehicles. So when it comes to an online activity, I may turn around and be able to tell you, we anticipate X number of learners, but I should also be able to tell you an X number of those are what we're expecting from the exact target audience, because you are going to have others. I always think that the others are of interest because they may identify a new unmet need in a group that maybe everyone was not focusing on, but that becomes outcomes data that's going to leverage a future project. In the interim, we want to be able to make sure that there are achievable metrics. That also is going to bring in your partners. Who are you partnering with to ensure that you are making the announcement of this new education available to the specific audience? If you're just casting a really wide net, then we're not doing our job in terms of educational development and delivery. So, we need to be conscious of that as we're assembling a proposal.
Yeah, I would say, again, I totally agree with Audrey. I think one of the things that's been helpful for us when we're talking about participation in target audience is we do postmortems on our projects when they're done. And Riaz, to your point, we report back out that we had 1,500 participants, and of that, 71% were in the target audience, et cetera. But what's important to look at is the other 30%, right? And so we look at that and say, so we did something similar in a similar therapeutic area focused on diagnosis. Why did we get so many internal medicine, or why did we get so many primary care, or we got a lot more NPs and PAs? And we look at actually their outcomes and their feedback. And I don't know if other providers do this, but we always ask for each person, how many patients do you see with this condition per week or per month? And if we see some significant numbers there, then we will add that into the next proposal and say, well, rheumatologist is the target audience here, and we anticipate that will be the majority of this. We've also seen in past programs that primary care are seeing these patients, are making diagnostic decisions, and we think that they would be a good audience beyond just the rheumatology. So I think it's a great question. I think it's just more, taking a look at what you've done in the past and what people have responded to. And, just being a little bit more specific about the way you clarify that in a grant request.
Perfect.
Just want to give you 5-minute warning.
Yep, I got that one. All right, and I will turn it back. But Amanda, just a really quick point of clarification. We got a question that said, Amanda talked about the feedback on proposals. How often do you share this information? I think you said you do it more on the RFPs. But is there any other clarification that you wanted to provide on that?
Yeah, sure. So for the call for grant applications, which is the traditional education grant type, we will provide feedback if you email and ask for it. Like I mentioned, with sometimes upwards of 30 plus proposals to review, it would be cumbersome to give feedback to everybody automatically. But if you do ask for it, I probably not, not always very timely responding, but all of us try to provide that feedback. And again, some of those responsibilities are with the grant managers as well. So on the RFP side, with the change projects, we actually provided in almost every instance. So I had 3 letter of intent review meetings last week, and I'm spending the time now typing up the feedback. Feedback goes automatically to those who are moving into the full proposal stage, so they can use that in designing their next full proposal. And feedback is offered to those that do not make it into that full proposal stage. Again, if you send us an email, we will provide you that level of feedback.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to ask this question really going back to, I'm going to just pick on Pete because I haven't heard a lot from you yet. So, and then we'll go to a wrap up and some takeaways. But I think many of us are on board with innovative activities, but sometimes the same old activities, but sometimes the same old activity type and platform are what the learners prefer based on experience and surveys. Example, a short 30-minute online text-based activity is sometimes ideal for busy clinicians who don't have the time. So really, how much of a play does that take into your planning process, and that reaching this audience might just be best with a really simple text-based initiative or webcasts and something plain old simple, not really super innovative and different.
Yeah, no, for sure. Plain old simple, again, as long as it works and you have data to support that it works, right, is great, as long as it satisfies the essence of what you're trying to achieve with the program. So I think where innovation comes in is when we sit down and we say, okay, look, we want to have patient level outcomes on this program, and therefore we're going to need to be able to work with a system to access EHR data, to be, to get personal health information and what are the HIPAA requirements, all those types of things. Again, if we start talking about that, that's where innovation comes in. And I think that, that's where you want to spend your time. But I think your point is a really good one. And I'm glad the questioner asked it, because this is something that we talk about often, right? Is, there's no reason to put together a Tesla, right? When, something less.
I like that car.
You do like that car. But if something else can get the job done just as well, there's no reason to burn commercial support or money on something that's just got bells and whistles. Sometimes I think that it's interesting to test or pilot things, but I'm completely of the school that don't out innovate what your program is trying to achieve.
Perfect. Audrey, I'm going to let you kind of go through some wrap ups of the key takeaways, or Pete, either one of you guys want to do it. And we'll put that up on the screen. Yeah. Go ahead, and then we'll just do one last second takeaway.
Sure. I think just one of the items in terms of outcomes, we were saying from an idea perspective of what you could do with education, thinking really big, you also have to think of what's going to work well from an outcomes perspective. And it doesn't always need to be shooting for level 6 or 7. That just may not be appropriate. So aligning that is key, because as you go up the scale, so do the costs for outcomes reporting. It's going to involve more people, more time, more data, and you want to make sure that all of that information is handled appropriately. So it really comes back to starting with the end in mind and being able to identify who you're looking to educate, what you're needing to get to them, how can you get it to them, and then in terms of measuring what you're doing, what's going to be appropriate. If it is knowledge-based education, that is needed because something is new. Telling you in a grant request that we're going to strive for level 6 or 7 seems a little silly. So really being realistic about what we're going to be able to deliver so that when we do, you are establishing your reputation for the next project.
Okay, and Derek's about to give me the hook, so I'm gonna. He's nodding, yes. So I'm gonna turn it back to you, Derek. But thank you. I would like to thank all my colleagues who joined this panel, and hopefully we've been informative and we've answered all the questions that everyone on the group has had. And survey. Go ahead, Derek.
Okay, great. Thanks, Riyadh. And thanks to everyone. That was a great session. And thanks to everyone who was watching and submitting questions. We got a lot of nice feedback and some good questions, so that was super helpful. Okay, so my last 2 slides. We have our own survey. It's right on the live page. There's a link that says, please take our survey. Your feedback is valuable to us. Especially, we want to know how you like this is our first time doing the 2-day Palooza thing. If you like it this way better, if you like it better when we did it all in one day. So let us know. And lastly, to view the next session, we're going to end this one. Scott will put up the next one. All you have to do is refresh your screen in about 2 minutes. And you'll be able to watch at the top of the hour. And the next session is ideas for developing effective digital interventions to change health behavior. So with that, we will end this session. Thank you, everyone. And I will be back on at noon.
Thanks.
Thank you.